Um, okay, guys, thanks for joining today, and then welcome to another episode of MVP Corner. And this is where we meet with the uh, MVP experts like Mitchell and some others as well that talk about some topics around what we do in our daily activities in our workplace and probably on our projects and what we need to know, understand, and so can talk about a series of topics and so on and so forth. And today we'll be talking about the fundamentals. I mean, to fundamentals that everyone should know about security around Web API security on the Power Pages. Before we start, my name is Ahmed, and then Abdulaziz. I'm MVP Microsoft Business Applications, and currently working at Accenture as a senior solution architect and also associate manager. And so also been specializing on focusing on the biz apps, the Power Apps recently and Power Pages as well. Most of the time, my project is always around that. And yeah, so also I'd like to introduce my colleagues, and also he's also a senior expert in this field as well. And his name is Mitchell, who is going to be our speaker today, our trainer, our facilitator today.
Yeah.
He's also an MVP in the business applications, and also he's a solution architect developer as well. He's originally from Brazil and is here. He's still here in Ireland, Dublin as well. And then so he has worked extensively around, developing Power Apps, Power Pages, and it's very good. I'm telling you, today is going to be very, very, very interesting topic, and it's going to take us through and what we um expecting to see or hear from Power Pages. I'm sure that everybody has been waiting for this, honestly, and see a lot of people asking around these Power Pages and security around that, and people want to know about this topic as well. So, is there currently is special his expertise around these Power Pages as well. So, and it's a started off as a .NET as SharePoint developer, and now is is diving down a deep dive in this Power Platform. Okay, so I think that's it. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. I want to say that once again, and then so maybe probably over to you, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you, Hamed. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here today. I'm gonna start the session, and because I have my slide of speaker introduction anyway, so I will talk about myself in that slide better. But in advance, just the idea of this session and similar ones I did in the past, they simply came because I saw there's a few like some other developers talking to me, especially if they came from a no-code world. Sometimes like there was a bit of lack of awareness on security, how to properly secure data, how does JavaScript work in terms of being executed in the browser, like what enforcements we need to do in an application to make them really secure and not only hide data in the browser. Anyway, so as Hamed was saying, I am an MVP in Biz Apps and currently in Power Pages, but I was also in the past, my first MVP award was in SharePoint, then I was awarded 2 times in Power Apps, and now it's Power Pages. I have a large experience in the IT field, so I started as a .NET developer, as Hamed was saying. I worked a long time as a SharePoint developer, and since I moved to Ireland since 2018, I have shifted slightly from SharePoint to Canvas Apps, Power Platform, and now I'm just working with the Power Platform. And I am from Brazil, as Hamed was saying. If you guys don't know me, if you wanna follow me or get in touch via social media, I am on LinkedIn and also on Twitter. And the agenda for today. So I'm gonna walk through a few concepts first. So just a bit of theory before I do the demos and show how it works. But mainly we're gonna start explaining how the Power Pages standard forms and lists work, what are the limitations and how can we customize each, like just in a high level way. What are the Power Pages Web API advantages? So what what can we do with the Web API that we can do with standard forms and lists. Also, why we need to be careful when we enable Power Pages Web API in our website. And then I'm going to explain some controls that we can have, how does table permission work, the column permissions, and extra validations we can do with C#. And just as a bonus, Web Application Firewall, that's a new feature that was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it went live last year. It's very good in terms of security as well. And then my demo is going to be around permissions and Web Application Firewall. So I'm going to show a few scenarios to show how they can be hacked and how to fix them, okay? So standard forms and lists, they are very easy to use. Like, it's basically a very quick way where you simply configure a form in a model-driven app, enable it, and then it displays in your portal. So it's like magic. In a few minutes, you enable them. However, they have some limitations. Like when you start to have cross-entity scenarios, it's going to be a nightmare to implement. There's also a very simple requirement that doesn't exist in out-of-the-box forms, that you cannot simply move between multi-step form stages. So you have the multi-step form tabs, but you can't programmatically switch the tabs. In terms of UI as well, if you want to customize how the form looks, you need to create CSS to override the custom classes that Microsoft puts on the controls, or you should do JavaScript hacks. Because basically anything you do in and out of the box form, if you add a custom script, you are going to be modifying Microsoft's the HTML and the content of the form with your custom JavaScript. But to me, honestly, that's a hack. We are hacking the form to make it work. And you cannot do bulk updates as well using those forms. Then those hacky solutions, they work. But for example, if you have those controls in the form, and tomorrow, like for example, we could create a JavaScript solution to find items based on ID or based on CSS class. And then if tomorrow Microsoft launches a new version where the DOM structure, like the class names changes or the ID of items changes, your code is going to stop, basically. So it stops working because you're doing a small hack on top of what Microsoft has, okay? Then with the Web API, what are the advantages that we have? It's very easy to do full CRUD operations. Similarly, how can you do with the Dataverse Web API? So you can do creates, reads, and updates, and create any code as you want in your pages. So you create custom HTML, and then your JavaScript can work in the way you want, and you are not tied to Microsoft CSS classes or HTML item IDs, for example. You create whatever you want, and you manage the code fully. And you also have full control on top of what you enable in the Web API. So it's very similar to Dataverse Web API, but for example, you don't have all the tables enabled at first. You need to explicitly say, hey, I want to enable this table, that table, and you tell what are the fields you want to be enabled for the Web API. And if you configure in Power Pages the permissions select for the tables and for the columns in the table, any Web API call is going to respect that. So you can be confident that there's not going to be any data exposure if properly configured. As I said, you enable only the tables you want, and also you have control on the fields you want as well. So to enable the Web API, basically Microsoft makes available the code that we say that is the Web API wrapper. You don't need to memorize this. I'm just showing as an example. It's on Microsoft Learn website. If you just Google it, you're going to find it easily. But the idea is for every page you want to enable the Web API calls. Or if you want to enable in the whole website, for example, you can put this on the header of the Power Pages website, the web template for the header. But it's basically, as soon as the page contains this, you can do calls using Web API.safe Ajax. That's going to work exactly as Dataverse Web API. So you can do get operations, creates, deletes, and everything you want. So the syntax is very, very, very similar. But with great powers comes great responsibility. Because if we enable the Web API, we can do a lot with it. However, if we are not careful, if we enable Web API, like with all the fields, if we don't put proper security, there's a few bad things that can happen to our website. And that's what I'm gonna explain here. So for example, if you have a look at some examples around or how to enable the web APIs, even some you find like in the Microsoft Learn website, they explain you to enable the web API, like there's no permission configuration involved on the same sample. There's no specific field enabling. So if you enable all the fields, you're gonna expose all the fields and make them all editable. And the problem as well is it's very easy to create a website. It's very easy to put custom code and find samples on the web and just paste it on your Power Pages website. But that concept of being a low code product and telling people, teaching people that are not very tech savvy, for example, to create websites, they can expose problems, because if the people don't have correct security awareness, they simply can copy content and enable something in the website and expose data. So that's the problem. Like, we need to have a strong awareness of what are the features, what are the limitations, because small mistakes can lead into data leaks or hacks. There's a few, if you Google, there's a few bad news sometimes circulating around, like, okay, Power Pages site was hacked, and like of making a fuss about it. In the end, if you read between the lines of those, it's not the Power Pages was hacked. In all those situations, what happened was someone created a Power Pages website, did not configure permissions properly, or over-enabled things that shouldn't be enabled, and because of that, the data leaked. But it was not a problem in the product. It was a knowledge problem, basically. One of the simple examples as well. So like, if we enable all the fields in a web API, even though it's read-only, like we enable a web API just to create a fancy UI for our website and just customize it wherever you want, whatever way we want. Nobody's going to be able to modify our content if we put it as read-only. But internally, the created by modified fields, they appear in any web API call that we make, if we do it that way. So for example, if I create a few records, that's not insensitive, but I can show that Michelle modified the records and what is the name of my business unit and some stuff like that. I don't think we should be exposing this, because it's not something that anyone external to the organization should be seeing, okay? And one phrase that I always like to say as well is like, low code does not mean low risk. So basically, it's very quick to develop something, but it doesn't mean that you don't have best practices to follow. So I think there's accelerators that we use in any low code tool, but you have to follow best practices. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know how security works, because otherwise there's always a risk of exposing data or something being hacked, okay? So for example, you see in these three web API enabling configurations that I have here. So basically, to enable any web API table, there's a site settings under Power Pages where we simply have to add the two configurations. So for example, one is web API / name of the table / enabled, and we put true if we want to enable the web API. And the second one is / fields. We can specify individually what field we want to enable. So it's a little bit of more work, obviously, but then we are sure that only those 5 or 10 fields we want to enable for the table, they will work or be exposed in our website. Whereas if we put the asterisk here, we are going to enable all the fields for the web API. And sometimes, as I was mentioning, that's not what we want. So see here, for example, if I enable all the fields for the web API, any user that simply finds my table address in Power Pages in the browser, because any web API call, for example, any web API table, any web API, any table that's enabled for the web API, if we simply paste this address /_API / the name of the table in the browser, we can see all the contents of the table. if we have permissions too, okay? So we see all the table values, and then we can see who's the owner of the record, who modified the record, what's the business unit, ID of it, and that's not something we want to be showing. And on the other hand, if we disable, like we enable only the fields we want and try to do the same for a table, you're gonna get an error message saying that the attribute asterisk is not enabled for the Web API. Then nobody can see fields that we don't want them to see. And we can simply, when we should, for example, if we wanna load a table like this with limited fields, we need to specify exactly the fields that we want to select in our query, and then it works. But you see, at the end, it works, but I enabled only 3 fields. So the user can see only those fields that I enabled. So there's no big problem. So even if they get the address and try to open it in a browser, it will be something that I intentionally enabled and the same that I will be using in my code. Okay. As I was mentioning, for example, if you do any type of development, sometimes in Canvas apps, I see some people maybe hiding data without configuring proper permissions in a Canvas app, which is a problem, but not a big of a problem because it's an internal app. So if you don't put proper permissions, but it's not exposed externally, okay, it's a risk, but it's a bit of a lower risk. But if you do the same in Power Pages, like in enabling the Web API fully and don't put proper permissions in the table, but do all the data filtering using JavaScript, it doesn't prevent people from accessing it. Because even if you put in a code, hide it on the page, all the calls made to the Web API, they can be found on the network tab in the browser. So if someone finds your Web API address, they can simply access data that they shouldn't. I'm going to show you the difference later, how it works with or without the proper configs. This is what I just said, like any request you make in the browser, they are visible on the network tabs. They can easily be inspected or debugged. And even buttons and fields, for example, sometimes you can do in your custom forms, like rules enforcements to enable or disable things or make things required. With JavaScript, it doesn't enforce anything because if the Web API calls are enabled, the users can easily hack that. And what we can do to enforce that security on the server side is basically we can leverage table permissions, assign the proper web roles to the user, and also use column permissions. Because, for example, column permissions will allow us to enable certain columns for editing, certain columns for read-only access. And that's how we can control the security better for like fields enablement in a table. And that's not going to be like just obfuscating anything on the client side. So basically, it's going to happen on the server. If someone tries to hack or modify a field that they shouldn't, they're going to be blocked. Okay. And what are the table permissions? So basically, they protect your records from any client side or liquid calls. So for example, even if you try to find a record, if you enable table permissions properly, if you try to find a record or expose data that the user does not have access via permissions, they can't. They simply won't find it because it's automatically trimmed. Any fetch XML query that you do, for example, trying to read data from Dataverse, if there is table permissions configured, Power Pages automatically will be appending extra filters in your query on the background. So it brings only the data that the user should see. In the table permissions, they are linked to web roles. So for example, we can, for example, have web roles for administrators that can see more data than normal users. And then normal users would see less tables, less data in the tables according to how you configure. All the table permissions, they are based on contacts or accounts. So basically you can set up the table permissions to display records linked to the current contact that represents the current Power Pages user, or the account of that contact that will be the company linked to the user. And the table permissions, they will apply to all the operations: create, read, update, delete, whatever. And even if you try to do the Web API calls that are not allowed with the table permissions, you're gonna get errors in your code. I'll show you how it works. And even if you can do the calls from JavaScript, as I was saying, they go through the same security checks as Liquid, so they won't work if you don't have the proper permissions, basically. The column permissions, as I was mentioning, it even fine tunes even better what the user can do. The same way, it's linked to a table, it's linked to a web role as well. So basically, users, they can have different levels of access in each table. Like an admin can modify more fields than the non-admins, and so on. Like I said, you can control whatever actions the user can do for the table. Like if, for example, you can enable all the fields to be read, but only 3 fields to be updated and 1 field to be created, for example. It's flexible enough for you to do it. There's one thing that we need to be aware as well. So for example, there's a common request sometimes that you wanted to create some sort of permissions based on values. So for example, you would only allow people to see records that they have statuses of active or priority of high. That cannot be done by only using table permissions. But what we can do on this, since the same rules, they apply to all the records when we set table permissions, is to have 2 different sets of table permissions. So for example, one that is gonna be one that allows people to read records, the other one that allows people to edit records. And what, for example, the common scenario is that you have a support request. If the record is on status of draft, you have both permissions applied, and then you control what field you assign the user in that record. You have 2 separate fields to grant permissions. Like one field grants edit permissions, the other one read permissions only. And whenever the status changes from draft to another status, you would be removing the value from the field that grants edit permissions, which would mean that as soon as the status changes from the draft to another thing, the users can only read the records. Okay, that's what I just said here. So for example, you have 2 columns, then one grants the access for edit, the other one's for read, and then whenever you submit a record, it takes out the permissions from the user when the status reaches something that they shouldn't be editing. Another way that we can improve this or make it maybe more complex or enforce our business rules that usually we will be doing via JavaScript is to have C# plugins. Because what happens is whenever we do any updates in any Dataverse table, via C# plugin, we can detect if the call on the Web API was made from Power Pages and run specific enforcements on it. So plugins will run anyway, regardless of the client that is calling an update to Dataverse, but we can detect if it was made by Power Pages. And then we can create more advanced scenarios. So for example, when I do an update in a table, I could validate value across different entities. I could restrict record updates. So even that scenario that I explained about preventing updates on records that they are not in draft, that could be easily done via plugin instead of doing the workaround of switching fields for the table. The other thing as well is there's sometimes uniqueness of some rules that we want to enable in the records that they cannot be done by simply configuring Dataverse or any other way. We can put any logic we want in a plugin, basically. And it's very easy to overcome some gaps that we cannot do, like certain types of updates preventing, because when we try to update data in Dataverse using plugins, they can reject any invalid requests before they even reach the database. So basically, by having plugins, even if we want to put not rules that are not only for Power Pages, for example, we can put rules that they work across Power Pages, Web API, Forms, or Canvas apps, or whatever. We can use a single piece of code that does everything for them. For that to work, we would be needing to register a plugin in the pre-operation stage. And for example, in the create or update messages, we can put logic to prevent any updates to be happening. And there's this iPlugin execution context 2 interface. That's the old one without the 2. Doesn't have the same property, but we can use this iPlugin execution context 2 interface. And the property called is portals client call to determine if it was made by Power Pages. So if it was made by Power Pages, for example, in this case, we detect that if it was made by Power Pages, we detect that it's true, and then if it's true, we can detect, for example, in this case, we want to allow only updates if the record had certain statuses. If the statuses that didn't match, we can throw an exception in the plugin. And when we throw an exception in the plugin, our Power Pages JavaScript code will be throwing a common data service error all the time. So it helps us to control this as well. And the last thing I will talk a little bit before I jump into the demos is Web Application Firewall. There's a few things that out of the box we can easily configure. So for example, we can limit excessive requests from a specific IP to prevent abusing of the Web API or accidental overloads. So for example, if you create a custom form and enable a table on the Web API for creating data in Dataverse, someone can find out that and create a script that creates thousands of records in your Dataverse. And the Web Application Firewall can prevent it. So for example, you can allow only 1 or 2 records created by minute, 1 call of a Web API post per minute, then it's gonna prevent that overload. You can even easily block malicious payloads. So for example, if you have people trying to do script injection attack in your website, it easily prevents it as well. And you can also control access by region. So for example, you have a website that, in our case, we want to allow the website to be used only from Ireland. We can prevent the access from other countries by blocking it. So it's very simple to set up. But for using the Web Application Firewall, we need to have CDN enabled first. So if you don't have CDN, you cannot enable the WAF. Okay, so enough theory for now. Let's show how everything works, guys. Just a second, just find it. In this screen here, what I have is basically a custom page with custom codes using the Web API to filter my support tickets. And I can create a ticket from here. So it's a custom form where if I, for example, the button is disabled at the moment, if I type all the details and I put here, my code detects that everything is provided and it enables my button for me. But what happens is, let's say, what if I don't put the ticket description? Button shouldn't be enabled. But as I control this via JavaScript, what happens is someone can easily come here in the developer tools, inspect the button. And where's the button? You see, there's that property. Just know it's not opening. Yep. Button has that property disabled, but I can simply edit it and mark it as enabled. So my table doesn't have the description field as required. If a user opens my button, right-clicks it, and tries to submit a ticket, it's going to allow. So that's one of the things that we need to be careful. Like if we need to make a field required, go to Dataverse, make it required, because otherwise someone would be able to easily continue editing your data, and then our ticket is created. So like, and that's something we wouldn't want to have. If we put rules in the form, someone can open it, edit the content on HTML and bypass the rules. So that's lesson number one. So if you have any type of field requirement that should be enforced, put the field as required on Dataverse, because otherwise people would be able to do it. As I was mentioning to you, we have here these support tickets. Anyone can access the address of a table enabled on the Web API on the browser via the browser or GET request on developer tools. And in this case, in the code, in the page, let me just go back. In my page code, I see only the records that they are linked to my portal user called Michel Mendes demo, because I applied filters using fetch XML. So saw Michel Mendes demo, Michel Mendes demo, Michel Mendes demo everywhere. But if someone is smart enough, they can find our Web API. And in this case, see, even though I have hidden the records using code, if someone found my Web API address, they can easily find records from other users. So you see this created by user Darth Vader by Bob Jarmusch. So all the link to the portal user that are other users, then we shouldn't be seeing the data from those users. Why they are seeing this? Because table permissions are not configured properly in my website. So I'm going to show you how to fix this. If we go to the website, I have already pre-configured some sets of permissions. And if we find table permissions here under, let's just wait this a little bit. Okay. We'll head into the security menu. We have table permissions. I have configured initially for this table support ticket. We see that the current active table permission that I have, it's set as global access, which means a user can see any record in that table, and that's not how we should do things. So beforehand, I have already configured alternative permissions, and what I'm going to do, just to be quicker here, instead of creating from scratch, I will deactivate the global access from the table. So I turn it off. Nobody has any permission at the moment, but I will turn on another permission that enables the user to see only records that are linked to their contact. So that field that I show, which is the portal user, is going to be based to show the records. So I must see only records where my user is assigned as a contact. So it's simply this. In this case, instead of being global, I have set the access type to be contact, and the relationship is the relationship that matches that field I want to use. So it's active now. What I can do is go back to my website. If I just refresh the cache, because we need to, whenever we change permissions like this, if you want to see the immediate effect. With an admin user, we head to this /_services/about, clear the cache. And after it finishes clearing, just takes a little bit of time. Okay, now it's finished. Just refresh the page. Oh, sorry, wrong table. In this support tickets table, we were seeing Darth Vader and Bob users, so it's only Michelle Mendes demo now because I limited my access to only records linked to my contact. Okay. Second thing I want to show as well is if we want to, just a second, yep. We have a field that it's meant to be internal only. So it's, for example, just a moment. If we have a field that, for example, we have an internal comment or an approval status that shouldn't be updated, it's not enabled on our website. So if we go back to my, just a second, if we go back to that support page, in my form, I'm enabling only 3 fields. But if we didn't have security properly configured, someone came to this, open developer tools, and they paste an update code. In this case, just zoom it. I'm trying to update the support, the ticket number to a dummy number. So for example, in this case, this ticket number is auto-generated internally and shouldn't be updated by JavaScript in the front end. The internal response as well. So I'm saying that it is like, this is approved, obviously, and then putting details that, okay, like for this ticket, I'm asking someone to pay 1K euros to me, and internally I'm setting it as approved, and it shouldn't be updated. But the problem is, at the moment, nothing is preventing the external user to do it. So if someone finds this code and pastes on the developer tools console, in a moment, the record is going to be created. And that's something that we shouldn't be allowing users to do. Just takes a few seconds. You see, as if it was successful, I log the item ID. So I did a post request, create my item with the fields that should be blocked, and just log it. If we refresh the page, we are going to see the hacked record appears here, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be allowed here. So for example, what we can do is, instead of allowing, like letting it free for the users and configuring via JavaScript, there's some website settings that we can configure in Power Pages related to the column permissions. If you head to security, there's the column permissions pane here. I have 0 configured, but I have one that I pre-created that is inactive. What I will do right now is I will activate it, and yeah, while it loads, I'll put it to load and refresh the cache just to be quick. I'll explain how it works. So if we go to column permissions, how it works is you can specify a name for the profile. Usually I put a meaningful name, so like name of the table, and maybe if it is related to a different type of user, you specify what's the web role or whatever you want to link. But basically you select one table. This table should have initially the table permissions configured, otherwise this won't even work. You specify here in all column permissions the permissions you want to grant to all the columns in the table. So for example, in this case, I've set all the columns in the table to be accessible read-only. That's fine. But then for other operations like creates and updates, only the tables, the fields that the user should update in the table, they are enabled. So they can only update the category, what is the user, name, and details. Now that it is enabled, if I try to do the same, trying to hack my table and inject a record that the user shouldn't, we will get errors. So it's going to be prevented. You see, we get the forbidden operation now because our column permissions prevented it. And then we see what was the attribute that was prevented. Because the ticket number was the first one in our call, we got it prevented. And if we try to update other attributes, it's going to be blocking each one at a time. So that's what I wanted to show in terms of permissions. And to wrap up, there is also another very interesting feature that was the Web Application Firewall that I was mentioning. I'm going to show first the configs and how we can prevent a few things. Without the Web Application Firewall configured, without Web Application Firewall configured, we could via JavaScript try to inject script tags in any content in our website, and if it was not properly escaped, that could lead to some very easy data hacks in terms of like sending the user to different websites and grabbing their access token and things like that. So by just having the Web Application Firewall enabled, we don't have to worry too much about it, because all that type of attack is going to be enabled by default. So what we have here in the Web Application Firewall section, there's a separate website that I configured it. It's not the same that I was showing before, that we have all the managed rules that are managed by Microsoft. They have that out of the box. So for example, if I go to my website, if I just ppdems prod, if I try to inject scripts in the page, same way in the developer tools, I have already prepared a few code samples to try. I iterate through all those payloads in my variable here, my array variable, and I will try to inject it in my table. Okay, so basically, if the Web Application Firewall is not enabled, I will be able to add script content in my text that could be potentially rendered. But as it is enabled, if I try to do it, it's going to be blocked. So all the requests they get, see, close the browser and try again, it's just a generic message that happens when I prevent the requests. In the same way, I have two situations here as well. So I'm going to show you custom configurations that we can do. And the first is the rate limiting, as I was explaining before. So I have this table called rate limited demos, where I set that I allow requests to that table, like 10 requests per minute. And I will be matching that request by request URI, and then it prevents it by IP address. Like if the user with the same IP address tries to do thousands of updates in the same Web API endpoint, or even reads, I'm going to prevent it to avoid overusing. So in this case, I have two tables configured. So I have one that I allow the unlimited requests, and the other one that I don't allow. I'll show you the difference here. Just a second. Okay. The first sample is I I'm going to try to create records. I have this script that it iterates from 1 until 100 and tries to create 100 records in a table. But the first try is in this table that I didn't set up the rate limiting. So basically, it's going to work fine and create 100 records. And no issues found. It's been logging everything perfectly. You see them out of order because they run asynchronously. But if I do the same request, but to my table where it's limited, we are going to get only 10 records created and the rest is going to be prevented. So you see, there's a few of them that got created successfully, 10 records as allowed, but in the mix, if it exceeded 10 records per minute, I got the error from the Web Application Firewall. The last thing I wanted to show is the geo-blocking in the table. So for example, the website here, I'm accessing this from Ireland. I can open it fine. But if I open it from a virtual machine that I hosted in Brazil, I'm not going to be able to open the same website. So if I copy the address, just a sec. Just waiting for the VM to load. If I go to Edge, try to open the same website, I simply get this, the request is blocked. So which means even if I try to do anything, if it's in a country that I don't want to allow it, it's not going to allow the user to open my website. And how did I do this? If we go back to the Web Application Firewall, there's another config that I say I want to block it. I want to block access from Brazil. I just specify that I want to match by geolocation. That socket address is the most recommended way to set this up. Then I match the country I want. I can put any country that I want to prevent the access. I set it as denied. So if I set it as allow, it allows. If I set it as deny, it will block, as I was demoing before. And I think that is pretty much what I had to show, guys. Is there any questions there?
Thank you.
No
Yeah, thank you,
problem.
Michelle. Thank you, Michelle, for this great section. I think there's a question here, and so can you hear me?
Yep.
So there's a question here around somebody's asking, and he understand that not using JS to enforce data validity. Can we say it's safe to use it for interactivity only, like visibility of a field based on some other field's value?
You can use, but the problem is, let me just think how can I explain this. You can use it to show or hide fields, but the problem is the field is going to just be hidden. If the person right clicks your form and tries to navigate through the HTML elements, they're going to be able to grab the value anyway. If that is not a problem, it's fine. But if you don't really want to expose that field, that's a problem. Aside for plugins, can we use business rule? You can use business rules, yes, but there's some limitations that basically, if you want to really enforce the business rules, like it has to be only at entity level. They don't work for visual validation in Power Pages.
Yep.
And if you want to really enforce it, you have to be compared. You have to be comparing all the fields in your table that are used in Power Pages every time to trigger business rules, because otherwise it won't be triggered in all the updates. What are the options then if you want to not display fields? You have to create custom interfaces, for example, not enable Web API for reading data, and you can use Liquid for this. And you can create your custom Web API using Liquid. And then by doing this, like you create a Liquid web template that outputs JSON content instead of being a page. If you do like data exposure of fields using Liquid and not Web API, you have full control of what can be really shown or not. Because if you put the logic on Liquid, it runs on the server. Okay, so for example, you could simply enable Web API for updates and not reads, and use Liquid to create your custom read Web API. That's what I would suggest. Yeah, exactly. But then you use Web API for updates and not read. Yep. Someone else is typing.
Yeah. So it seems there are a lot of questions today.
Cool.
That's good. Yeah, so while we wait for questions, so I want to thank you for this, and it's really great. One of my questions I want to ask as well is that can we give global access to lookup table like nationality, states,
Yes.
type of other
Yes.
things?
No, in
Okay.
that case, it's fine. In that case, it's fine because it's just tables that they should have global access. But the only thing as well I recommend is like deactivate the asterisk for the fields and enable only the fields you want, like ID, name, and something else. You know, then you won't have a problem. Yeah, I'm gonna paste a chat in the link here, a link in the chat here about the business rules. Just an example if you guys want to have a look as well.
Yeah, that's great. While doing that,
Yes, exactly. The server logic as well is a nice option, but it is in preview, guys. So just bear in mind, like you can use it. You can instead of enabling the web API, use that server logic to replace the operations you want to make more secure. But at the moment, it's not GA, so you shouldn't be using that in prod. It's nice to be playing around. Yep.
Yeah. I think it's a new thing still in preview. Like it just came out. Probably this one of the web release that's still in preview. I haven't tried that myself as well. So
Yeah.
other questions around is there's any update on the low code plugins Power FX? Has it gone beyond the preview stage?
I don't think so.
I think
I
so.
want
I don't
it.
think so.
I want
I
it.
think it's still in preview.
No, actually, there
It's,
I did some experiments with the low code plugins as well to prevent updates in Power Pages website. It's very cool as well.
yeah.
But the problem is the same. It's the same as server logic. You know, we are just experimenting at the moment. We shouldn't be using that for production websites, basically.
Okay. Good. More questions to come in.
Haven't explored the server logic. How different? Okay, haven't explored the server logic, but how is different C# plugin really? I'm not sure the topic. The server logic, because plugins are mostly for deletes and updates, but server logic, it's for anything. Like you can create your your custom read operations as well. So for example, instead of the way I explained, okay, you can create your custom web API using Liquid that outputs JSON. You could do that with server logic as well. You can do that for updates and reads. I think it's going to be something very, very useful for Power Pages anyway. Like, and especially because we could create our custom API endpoints and reuse the same server logic across different pages. It simplifies a lot of stuff, you know.
That's good. Okay. Let's see if there's any questions. Okay. Right. Still have more questions coming up. Let's see. We still have some time, like 2 minutes.
Yeah. Let's wait for it.
So yeah, let's keep your question coming, anyone. Yeah, do we have sure. So this section is recorded and it's going to be available for if we are in the group, we're going to share that in the group, and it's going to be available on the YouTube as well. And then probably you can share it to your emails if you have register for this section as well. Okay. Okay, it's another question for you.
Could expand a business rule bit. I thought you really can't use that. No, you can, but it's just you can't use it for front end stuff, basically. If you are using it for like business rules as you have in model driven apps, where you hide fields, you show fields, you make you put the recommendation in a field, it won't work. It won't work at all. But if it's for server side, if it's like to make a field required, or let's say simple rule, for example, if you put a bad word, like you want to prevent someone to put like fuck in a field, you simply detect it with a business rule and you can say throw an error. It's going to prevent on Power Pages, it's going to prevent on Canvas apps, it's going to prevent on model-driven app, it's going to prevent on Power Automate. Whatever is the client you call, if there's business rules set to entity, like to make a field required or to throw errors according to values, it's going to work. It works. No, there's no issues. It's just when you talk about visuals stuff that don't work at all, but if it's stuff that happens on the backend, it doesn't matter if it's Canvas, model-driven, flows, Power Pages, it triggers. But all the fields, let me phrase it in a meaningful way. Like all the fields that you use to trigger the rule, they have to be involved in the update. So for example, if the business rules detect if there's a bad word in one field, but the update is made in another, that business rule doesn't trigger. So even, even if it's active, the field involved in the checks of that business rule, they have to be in the update. So this example I gave shows a little bit where how can we force it to be compared all the time in any updates if that's a problem. So just need to be smart on how you configure it, basically.
Good. Good. Okay. Let's see if we can take one or more questions then before we wrap it up.
No problem.
Today.
We wait for it.
All right. Good. Okay, guys. Let's see.
Not sure if JS will appreciate it. If your website is like, the question is, when we select private websites, so are we still at risk? Not for external access, but someone in your company that has access to your website that you explicitly granted, if they are hacky enough, they can bypass the rules using developer tools in Chrome anyway. So that's what I was saying. So for example, if you have a Canvas app, like you enable, it's not only for Power Pages, guys, it's valid for model-driven as well. If you don't put proper permission in a record and you just hide it, like you have a Canvas app where you put filters on the Canvas app, but there's no proper permissions on Dataverse, if someone finds the web API address on Dataverse and wants to update other records, they can, basically. So the concept applies to any other framework as well. So it's not security by obscurity. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Pen testers. Yeah, pen test. Yeah. Okay. All right. Is there any way that we can reach out to you on LinkedIn or something? Do you want to share? Yeah. People can reach out to you on.
Yep, for sure. Let me put my LinkedIn. It wasn't a presentation, but I can put it on the link anyway, just to be easier to people.
All right.
I got also, like I said, I have Twitter as well, guys. So if whatever you prefer, I don't mind. Just ping me. I'm gonna put LinkedIn. I'll find the Twitter too.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much, Michelle, for your time and for the great topic that you have discussed today. So this is a wonderful one, and I know you have a very tight schedule. We just have to do this for the community, and then I think someone's still raising their hands for a question. Okay, feel free to reach out to Michelle on LinkedIn as well, and then you can also reach out to me if you need any other maybe information or something. You can always reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. And also, you have the mature blog there. Yeah, let me share
Yep.
again as well. So you can always get. I think I see he has a lot of stuff there that's very useful, and probably I need to explore that myself. So all right, thanks everyone. Thanks Guy. Thanks Pichel for this
Thanks,
topic.
guys.
Great one. Thanks you. Thank you. We're gonna see you in the next section and keep updated. Thank you and have a good day.
All right. Thank you, guys.